God, the God that we're talking about in the monotheistic sense, is that he's the only God whose reason for existence is explained in himself.
That's right.
You get Zeus and you get all these other lower G gods that
those were
are
God
explained.
Of the gaps.
Yeah,
Zeus.
They are.
That's right.
Their reasoning, their reason for existence is found from outside things.
Exactly.
So.
Yes. No. The what's it called? The pantheon. The pantheon, like all the Greek gods. Those were God of the gaps. The God of thunder. Oh, there's thunder. Oh, okay. Maybe there's a God. Yeah. Or, oh, wow, we had such a good crop this year. Oh, okay, it's the God of agriculture and stuff like that. That's exactly what God of the gaps would be. That's trying to find a God in nature itself. Okay?
Yeah.
And no. These metaphysical proofs that we're talking about, what conclusion did we reach? What conclusion did Aristotle reach? That there are multiple gods? No. That there is a single one. That if we do this logical examination, we're going to find that the source of all things has to be a single source.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Today on the Worldview Bros, as usual, we will discuss one of the biggest questions. Does God exist? In particular, we will analyze some of the best arguments in history, from Leibniz, Aquinas, Augustine, and Aristotle, and we will consider some of the most common objections. Is it possible to come to a final answer on this? We will discuss it all on the Worldview Bros.
Good morning, my fellow human beings, and welcome to the Worldview Bros podcast, where we, Jim and I, talk about some of the most important questions. Very important questions. I am Sal, and again, this is my brother Jim, a.k.a. Slippin' Jimmy, a.k.a. Jimbo Shrimp, a.k.a. Butterbeard, a.k.a. Brogo Baggins, a.k.a. the Adukinator, a.k.a. Jimbo, I can't remember some of them.
Yeah, well, I mean, you forgot.
Yeah, what did I miss?
Well, I mean, you forgot Single Malt Jim.
What's Single Malt Jim?
Yeah, Single Malt Jim. I mean, you can't forget that. It's a very important part of who I am.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, as I'm enjoying a really beautiful single malt right now. Very nice.
Yeah, in the morning, right? Because I said good morning to human beings. Cigars and single malt.
No, it's a very pleasant evening here, enjoying some cigars and a little single malt. But Sal, that's too harsh a drink for him, though.
Yeah, no. I'm sticking to the beer, though. Hey,
okay.
Beer's fine.
It'll do. I mean, It's kind of like saying I'm eating like a beautiful steak and you're like, oh, I'm okay with Cheetos. Like,
Wow.
Yeah,
wow,
that's
okay.
what happened.
A little much, but okay.
No.
All right, well, today's a special day, as is any day that we get together and get to talk about some awesome topics. Make sure, please, to follow us on social media. Go to Facebook, like our page. Follow us on Twitter, on Instagram. We've had some shenanigans in the past on our Instagram story. Go check us out, doing several different things over the summer. Kind of getting ready to go into the school year. Us two teachers here. But again, follow us on all social media and also email us. Email us at theworldviewbros@gmail.com. We want to hear your questions. We want to hear your concerns. We want to hear what you have to say. Now, in regards to today, we are tackling the question of who is God? Does God exist? Right? So, are we just machines? Are we just, machines covered in flesh? Or are we much more than that? Right? Different people will tell you different things as far as the existence of us and this world. But I think ultimately it comes down to the question of who is God, and do you believe in God, and is he real? Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah. Well, and in particular, I mean, our focus will be, or sorry, let me put it this way. Our question is a little bit more focused. The question is simply, does God exist? And can we give any kind of rationale for God existing? And, the way you phrase it, Sal, what would naturalists say? I think naturalists are probably not even really concerned about the question. And I think that's a problem. They're just saying, oh,
Definitely.
You know what? That's just not a question for us. Or if you really push them and say, well, what's the beginning of all things? Well, it just might be, it's just the universe and we can't question it. Or many atheists will say, well, there are certain laws of nature, and they're essentially taken as a brute fact. They just exist, and that's that. That's ultimately, I think, not going to hold up to the rationale that we will be exploring today. In particular, then, we're looking at that question.
Definitely. So we have three main arguments or rationales, as Jim put it, for you guys today, that we're going to just be talking about and just kind of breaking down. And we're going to be starting with the cosmological argument and rationale, which is the Aristotelian rationale, and kind of breaking down what that means. Then secondly, we will be going into the Jim.
The rationalist proof. We'll look at the rationalist proof, or also simply known as the proof given by the principle of sufficient reason.
Let's get right into it. The cosmological argument, kind of, Jim, why don't you kind of open us up in this?
Yeah. So the cosmological argument for the existence of God is probably the most famous and the one that you're going to hear a lot about. And also the one that many of the new atheists will try to disprove. And I think what we'll find is that they tend to use kind of a version or an understanding of it that is a bit of a straw man. One book that we highly recommend that we've kind of been exploring as we broach this topic is an excellent book by Edward Feser, and it's called The 5 Proofs of the Existence of God. This is an excellent book because what it does is it will re-examine the 5 most famous proofs for the existence of God that we have seen throughout history, and kind of giving them a fresh explanation and kind of letting us know what are some of the pitfalls. Okay, but to get right to it, the cosmological argument that's provided by Aristotle is also famous for being called the proof of the unmoved mover. Okay, so looking at God as an unmoved mover, the entity upon which every movement will rest. And as Feser explains in his book, that's maybe not the best way to look at it, because it tends to, the way Aristotle imagined motion is not the same way that we typically think of motion. Mm-hmm. We have like a very Newtonian idea of what motion is. And for Aristotle, really a better way to put it is he's talking about just change. Okay, so how do we understand change, and how is it that analyzing change, we can actually make a proof for the existence of God, right? So let's think, why don't you tell us out an example of where you would just see something changing?
So maybe a heating up a kettle of water because you're going to make coffee, or you're going to make whatever, so okay. Water boiling, and it changes. Right.
So we're kind of looking at how it would be possible for the water to change then. So the water's going to undergo change. Okay. Yeah. So if the water is going to undergo change in this way, the way that Aristotle would kind of imagine it is that the water itself had a potentiality. Yeah. That water has a potential to become hot. Mm-hmm. Okay. But is it going to do it just on its own? No. I mean, something has to actualize that potential, right? Mm-hmm. So what would be actualizing the potential of the water becoming actually hot? Well, it would be the pot, I guess. The pot is causing it to heat up, right? The pot is making contact with it. You might say, oh, the fire. Okay, well, right. So notice how, and that's another thing. Notice that when one thing is going to actualize the potential of another thing, sometimes it itself is becoming actualized by something else, right?
Uh-huh.
So what's actualizing, what's making the pot become hot? Well, the fire, you know? And so then what's causing the fire? Well, the stovetop, you know, and so on and so forth.
Right.
So anyway, the point here is that that's what Aristotle means really by motion or by change, is that it appears that everything that we look at is filled with these potentials. Okay, so things have a potential, but then that potential is actualized by something external to it. Okay, and the way that people will typically understand this cosmological argument, and what Phaser's going to say is a little bit of a pitfall, is we say, oh, okay, I get it. So the water is heated up by the pot, and the pot is heated up by the fire. The fire came from the stove, and the stove was built by a human. Yeah. Okay, and then okay, well, what actualized the potential for this human to be actual? Yeah. Well, you know, you can go on down the line. Eventually, then you're coming to the famous first mover, the first mover who actualized everything.
Yeah.
Okay. Now.
So basically, you're saying, so just what, as far as like something coming to be, like, so whatever starts, whatever begins, then has a cause for
itself?
For itself.
Oh, well, yeah. So the first thing, so then the argument is that the very first thing needs to be something that is not actualized by something else.
Yeah.
So the first mover has to be, really a better way to put it, is the unactualized actualizer. Okay? So the typical phrase is unmoved mover, but maybe to be more accurate, we're going to say that this original entity is the unactualized actualizer. So what are we positing that this unactualized actualizer does not have? This unactualized actualizer does not have potentiality. Yeah. In other words, it is pure what? Pure actual, pure actuality.
Pure existence, pure actual.
Yeah. So now, but here's where the critique comes in. Rightly, a lot of philosophers argue, why must it be that in this changeable process, it has to come to a beginning point? Why can it not be that we simply go back in infinity with potentials always being actualized? And we can kind of actually see this because a lot of people think that this just means that we go back in time. Okay, that all of existence kind of goes back in time, and we can say, oh, it makes sense that in the Big Bang you have like the starting point of everything. So maybe in the Big Bang we have this first actualized non-actualized actualizer. Yeah. But actually, we can imagine there are some models of the universe that say that actually the Big Bang came about from a big crunch. That there was a big crunch, and that big crunch created the Big Bang, but that big crunch was simply a previous universe which had expanded, and then contracted and created a new Big Bang. So many physicists can imagine the fact that we have a universe that really is eternal, and maybe it contracts and it expands and it contracts and it expands and it contracts and it expands. And why can't it be the case that this simply goes back to infinity? Okay, and it's a difficult argument to get around of, frankly. It's difficult to imagine. It's difficult to imagine that the universe is simply eternal. Okay, and that changes just go back into eternity. But actually, this is what many of the Greeks believed. Many of the Greeks believed that the universe is in fact eternal. Okay.
I was going to say that's early on. That was what they all thought, right?
That's right. Yeah. Now, so here is where the argument actually is stronger, because we're going to insist that this cosmological argument does in fact work. And the point is this, and this is something that Phaser is really good at pointing out. Mm-hmm. Let's go back to the water. Yes, it is true that some series are linear in that fashion, and they can conceivably simply go back to infinity. But not all series are infinite. And here's what we're talking about. If we actually look at the very existence of the water as a kind of potentiality, okay? Does the water have the potentiality to exist? Well, yes. I mean, the water obviously does exist.
Right.
But then we ask ourselves, why is it that the water exists? What's keeping the existence of the water at that moment in time? Okay? And we can look at it kind of from a physics point of view. Well, we would say that the water is able to exist because it's made up of molecules, you dummy. Yeah. You know, of course we know that.
Yeah.
Well, right, okay, so sure, I get it. Water molecules are made of 2 hydrogens and oxygen. That's right, H2O. Mm-hmm. But then, obviously, what's keeping those atoms in existence? What is actualizing the potential of the existence of those atoms?
Yeah.
Well, okay, or the molecules. Well, we would say the electric force is there's a binding, there's a force that binds the hydrogen with the oxygen, and that's maintaining the existence of it there. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, what's actualizing the potentiality of those molecules having that particular force?
Yeah.
So the point is, I'm not going back in time. This series is not going back in time. This series is one that's simultaneous. And we're actually just looking at that moment in time, what is the string of actualities that is maintaining the existence of the water. Okay?
Yeah.
Now, this kind of a series is necessarily not linear. This is a series that is called hierarchical. I would necessarily have to have a certain starting point, or else we're going to say that the water exists for no reason.
Yeah.
Okay?
Right.
But we see that the water has potentials that are being actualized, so we see that there is, in fact, a string of causes that is maintaining the existence of this water. Okay? So I'm not talking about going back to the Big Bang. The cosmological argument actually can take any object at any moment in time and try to think back on the causes that are maintaining the existence of that thing, mm-hmm. right? So that is necessarily not an infinite series. That is a series that has to culminate somewhere. Otherwise, we can make no sense of the existence of anything.
Right, yeah.
So,
yeah, that makes sense.
So it's what's beautiful about this argument is that it's not really subject to the laws of science, and that's okay. Like that's an objection that many atheists are going to make. Mm-hmm. They're going to make the claim that, well, we actually have to understand the universe only in a scientific way, because that's the only way that's going to satisfy me. That's the only thing that I recognize as reasonable if we approach it scientifically. That's just a whole other conversation. Here we would have to point out the fallacy of scientism. Mm-hmm. The fallacy of scientism is that science is the only way that we can make sense of anything.
Yeah.
But on closer inspection, I think we're going to find that that's just ridiculous. Mm-hmm. Okay, let's talk about what science is then. Science is simply meaning that we would apply the scientific method to try to find mathematical equations to how the universe behaves. But one thing that Phaser does point out is that, well, of course science does a really good job at doing that, because when it explores reality, it's saying that it's only going to grab hold of anything that is mathematical. So the net that you're throwing out into the universe is one that is designed to only understand things that are mathematical. Mm-hmm. So what is it going to fail to pick? What are we going to fail to pick up with our net if our net only picks up things that are mathematical?
Yeah.
It's going to fail to pick up
right. things
that are not mathematical.
Right. Yeah.
How do you know that you're not that you're not missing certain things about the universe. Or let's take it back a step. What does math even mean? Is math explained by science? No, on the contrary. What has actually a higher authority, math or science? The reality is math, because science is just really an application of it.
Yeah.
Science is really just a description of nature. Mm-hmm. This is where we have the famous objection that Wittgenstein, kind of a mouthful of a philosopher, but Wittgenstein is a German philosopher, not surprisingly, given his name. But he says, like, the fallacy of our one of the biggest fallacies of our current age is the naive belief that by describing the universe, we have in fact explained the universe. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay? Science does not explain the universe. Science describes the universe. This is a big point that Isaac Newton makes. Isaac Newton is like the perfect scientist. Perfect scientist. He understood science the way you're supposed to understand its proper role. Mm-hmm. That's right.
Yeah.
Like, you know, when Isaac Newton talks about the Principia Mathematica, where he describes the laws of motion, and where he describes the law of gravity, he doesn't say, "Oh yeah, let me tell you exactly what gravity is." He's far too intelligent to make a claim like that. Mm-hmm. He actually makes the claim, no, I'm not going to tell you what gravity is. I'm just going to tell you how a description of gravity. We can, by analyzing gravity, we see, yes, we are finding these beautiful mathematical relationships when we analyze gravity, okay? But does that mean that by finding this relationship, that the force of gravity equals gravitational constant times mass divided by the distance between the two masses squared, by saying that I'm telling you what gravity is? No, that's ridiculous. I'm just telling you something that we've learned about gravity.
Yeah.
Right? So, anyway, the point that I'm simply trying to make is that it's not surprising that if we're going to try to find an argument for the logical existence of God, that it's not going to be simply using scientific method. Yeah. That it's ultimately going to have to be subject to a more metaphysical proof that we would have to make. Yeah. Okay, so these proofs are metaphysical proofs that we have access to, independently of how far advanced or how little advanced we might be in science, which is simply a better and better description about how it is that nature operates.
Right. Yeah.
So,
you know, and in my researching and just reading up, and I also found, and obviously I'm going to cling to this because I can relate to it a little bit more, or not relate to it, but it interests me a lot. Yeah. And there's like the personal side to the existence of God and having the creator, the actualizer, right? Right. And I don't know if, are you familiar with William Lane Craig?
Oh, definitely.
And so I loved this quote that he said, and his words say, "The only way to have an eternal cause but a temporal effect would seem to be if the cause is a personal agent who freely chooses to create an effect in time." I mean, like, it just that just makes sense to me, right? And that kind of going into talking about how personal God is, right? And because sometimes I feel there's, you know, we look at science and right away we want to debate science, and we want to talk about what these great thinkers talk about, how they describe it as far as with scientific reasoning or whatnot, but we don't really talk too much about the personal side or I guess just the personal side of God, you know, and that it makes sense, you know. I mean, we're personal beings, and we strive to have that relationship with God, and that comes, I mean, that is part of the equation, I guess, if you want to put it in those words, of why he created the universe and of it and his existence.
No, dude,
Am I making sense?
You're so right. You're so right. Like, I mean, I have opinions about that. Like, going back to the idea of science, if we consider the things that we're able to apprehend, look, of course, science is an amazing thing. Its role or its realm is that of which we're able to perceive with the physical senses. That's fine. So in other words, the realm of science is the material. And the reason that so many people are simply trying to give a purely scientific explanation to life is because they have accepted the premise that the only thing that is real is material, right? Yeah. Which, again, in further inspection, we kind of see this thing just fall off as completely illogical. So many realities are, of course, not material.
Yeah.
Some of the most obvious ones are math and logic. Okay? Yeah. There's nothing material about the triangle that I'm imagining right now. Okay? Yeah. It doesn't have any matter. It's simply an idea. Okay? Yeah. It's something that exists as a conception in your mind.
Yeah, and the fact that you can do that, the fact that you can imagine a triangle in your mind.
Yeah.
I mean, that's something that can't really be explained either.
No, right. I mean, to go a little bit Platonic, I know Plato has some fallacies, but I think it's helpful for us to think about it this way. What is more perfect? The triangle that I'm imagining in my mind right now, or a triangle that I would make with some wood here in a minute, you know, if I cut some wood and put it all together, which one is a better triangle? The one that I imagine or the one that I made? Which one is more perfect?
The one that you imagine.
Of course. The one that I imagine is completely perfect. It's completely straight, okay? In a sense, it is kind of superior to any triangles that I would make with wood or with clay or something else, okay? So it's not surprising to me. Or also, let's put it this way. What is it that's most remarkable about a human being? What can we talk about some aspect of a human being being superior to another aspect of a human being? So in other words, is your arm a part of you, Sal? Yes. Yeah, okay. Of course. Every part of your body is in some sense you. Okay. Yeah. But there is something about you that is kind of hierarchically above every other aspect of who you are, right? Yeah, your appetites. What about your appetites? Like when you get hungry or something like that. It's something that's a part of you. But what is the most superior part of you? I would say your consciousness. Okay, is that material? No, I think not. Okay, so you're absolutely right when you talk about like the personal aspect of God. What do I suppose is the origin of all of life? What do I suppose is the origin of all of existence? Something just material? When we've already seen that non-material things are actually superior to material things in certain regards, right? Yeah. It stands to reason that the originator of all of being is non-material, is a metaphysical entity, is spirit, in fact. Yeah. So...
You know, and I feel like that leads into the way how people are different and conceive certain ideas and are more prone to believing things, right? Yep. So someone who is more in tune with the unseen, right, and not as worried or I don't want to say lost, but not as worried or thinks as much about the material. You know, you could just tell them, hey, there's a God that's personal and he loves you and he sent his son and all these, you know, like he created the world and those people might very well be the people who are just like, I believe it. Yeah, that makes sense, right? But I do understand that there's the people who are like, I need to be able to understand and see why that is. Yeah. And there should be something material that shows it. And, right. You know, so I get that.
Yeah. But, you know, to go back to these proofs, like, again, the cool thing about them is, you know, obviously it's not our objective right now to talk about, okay, exactly what God are we talking about? I find it so cool that this proof comes from Aristotle, and he did not have an axe to grind when he does this proof. He does not have an incentive to prove that there is a single God, because as we'll get to it here in a minute, because we didn't finish completely the argument.
Yeah.
As some of the attributes of God that come from this proof. Aristotle and Plato had every reason to actually to try to prove that there are many gods. Mm-hmm. Okay, this is why Socrates famously is put to death for corrupting the citizens of Athens for teaching that the gods don't exist, but that in fact that there is that if there is a God, it's a single unmoved mover.
Yeah. Okay,
they had every incentive to not do this proof, but this is where reason led them. Mm-hmm. Okay, and so again, once we see that the what gives actuality to the potential of everything that exists has to be this entity that is pure actuality. Then we can start to look at why, first of all, it needs to be one. Yeah. Why is it that the actualized actualizer must be one?
Yeah.
Because if it's not one, if we say that there's another, then we're going to have to distinguish the one from the other.
Yeah.
So how are we going to distinguish the one from the other? Oh, well, it must be because it has like a different attribute. There must be some kind of attribute that we can distinguish the one from the other. But if it has some other kind of attribute, that means that it's subject to change. It can have this attribute or it could not have this attribute. You kind of see that? Or maybe you might say, oh, maybe these entities are identical, but they're kind of just different in position. Like one's over here and just one's over there. Yeah. Well, wait a second. If it's over here, over there, that means that it would have the potential to be over there instead of over here.
Yeah, right.
So that would be a potentiality that would need to be actualized. Mm-hmm. But I thought we were talking about the actual unactualized actualizer.
So who actualizes the fact that they can be
that's right.
here or there, yeah.
So no, that's why it has to be one.
Yeah.
It has to be one. Okay. Mm-hmm. And we can look at other aspects. So for instance, is it changeable? No, it's not changeable. Oh, so therefore it's immutable. Unchangeability. So that means unchangeability is a natural attribute of God. Oneness is a natural attribute of God. Mm-hmm. Okay? How about this? This unactualized actualizer is able to actualize everything because on this entity rests everything that has been actualized.
Yeah.
And so therefore we say that this entity is omnipotent.
Yeah.
Its power means its power to actualize. Well, it actualizes everything. So it is omnipotent. Yeah. Okay, what about position? Can it be here or does it need to be over there? Is it localized somewhere? No, it's not localized somewhere. So it's, or also with time. Did it exist before or later? Well, if it exists in time, that means it's subject to the change of time. But again, it doesn't have that potentiality. So this entity is also eternal.
Yeah.
Is it imperfect? Nope, it's perfect. This entity is perfect. Also this, what does it mean to be good? To be good means that you fulfill any potentiality that you may have. In other words, that you are complete as an entity as you're supposed to be. Well, again, this entity has no potentiality left to be actualized. So this entity is also fully good, right? So as you can see, we have all of these attributes of God that are all fitting there simultaneously.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
And I also, and I know promise we'll get to the finishing this.
Oh yeah, we'll look at the other one.
But I also can't help but think of what the Bible says though as well, and it, quite frankly, I think the Bible is very clear that God is the uncaused or actualized actualizer, right?
Right.
That first cause. And I mean, even if you look at Genesis 1, the Lord made the heavens or First Chronicles 16:26, we know that God is not himself a physical part of the universe.
Okay.
Second Chronicles 2:6 says the heaven and the heaven of heavens cannot contain him. We also know that the Lord is the everlasting God.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like,
yeah.
So you think of like people like Aquinas, who kind of took the Aristotle's, ideas and kind of got to this point with the unactualized actualizer, right? Mm-hmm. And he's not just like a Christian that pulled it out of nowhere,
That's
right? Like even the scripture is very clear in telling us that this is who God is, and
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's amazing that we can find these attributes through reason, but then that we also see it in the Bible.
Yeah.
It's amazing. And I wanted to go ahead and jump to the next one, Sal. What do you say? So
let's do it.
The second proof we wanted to talk about is the one that's called the rationalist proof. And one reason it's called the rationalist proof is simply because this is famously attributed to Leibniz, and he's kind of coming at it from the perspective of the reasonableness of the universe. Okay.
Oh yeah.
So this proof has to do with something called the principle of sufficient reason. So maybe that's a better way to think about it. The proof of the existence of God given the principle of sufficient reason. So what is this PSR? It simply means that the universe as we experience it, as we've actually seen it empirically, it seems that everything that we look at has some explanation. That everything in the universe either we can either explain it, or if we find ourselves limited that we can't explain it, it seems obvious that it has an explanation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
That it has an explanation that at least somebody could get to, if not a human being. Okay. Yeah. And I think that this is going to be one that's very difficult for a lot of people to swallow. Like, how can you definitely prove that everything can be explained?
Yeah.
And I would argue that we certainly live that way. Okay, we certainly live as if everything can be explained.
How can this be? Right?
Yeah, and like our opponents, the atheists who simply want to explain everything with science. Okay, well, what are you doing with science?
Yeah,
you're trying to make sense of the universe. You are already assuming. What are you assuming if you're doing science, guys? What are you assuming if you're doing science? You're assuming that the universe makes sense.
Yeah.
If the universe just didn't make sense, if in and of itself it's not intelligible, then we wouldn't be able to trust any assertion or any conclusions that we would be making when we analyze the universe.
Yeah.
The very fact that we examine it, we're already taking for granted that it is intelligible, that it's not just nonsense, right? So, to give what could be like an example of something that we would look at, Sal?
All right, so yeah, let's use the here we go. I love basketball, right? So let's pretend that we have a basketball on the court, and young Michael Jordan shows up. Hadn't played basketball yet, and he's just looking at it, right?
Yeah.
It's like, what is this thing?
Well, so he's wondering why is this basketball here?
Yeah.
Is it just an accident of the universe that there's a basketball there?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know. We're walking up to a court and we see a basketball. We probably start inferring all kinds of things that might be the right explanation. But
right.
What are we assuming that there is? We're assuming that there's an explanation.
Yeah.
We're not assuming that the basketball just materialized. Because that's our experience. Our experience when we behold this world in which we live is that everything happens for a reason.
Yeah.
There is a reason for everything. Right. And when it comes to what explanations we're talking about, any explanation.
Yeah.
Explanations we're talking about could be explanation as to how it is that the basketball is able to exist. but also why it's there at that moment.
Mm-hmm.
Who brought
in
it there?
time,
You
what
know,
position it's in.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Right.
So that is the principle of sufficient reason. That seriously, guys, that everything has an explanation.
Yeah.
Okay. So are we simply asserting this, or how do we prove it? Actually, it is difficult to prove it positively. What is typically done is the principle of sufficient reason is proved negatively.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So what if we assume that there is no principle of sufficient reason? What would life look like if we didn't have, if the principle of sufficient reason were not true? It would mean that as we experience our world, that we would be familiar with things just happening for random reasons. Like you're walking and suddenly a goat pops up in front of you and hits your head or something, you know? Now you might say, oh, well, there are all kinds of things that happen and I don't really understand why. That's not the point. Do you really think that when things happen, there isn't a reason for why it happened? Right. I bet you don't think that. Yeah. You know? It just may well be that you haven't gone and investigated why, right? And again, it could even be that certain things, maybe we don't even have full access as to why it happens. But we certainly believe that there's a reason for why it happens, or for some kind of explanation for it. So anyway, the negative proof works like this. If we assume that it's not true, okay, then how are you going to argue to me that it is in fact not true? What, you're gonna give me arguments to tell me that PSR is not true? Okay, what evidence do you want to give me? Whatever evidence you would give me, you're going to have to try to give me some kind of a reason. As you're explaining it to me, you have neurons firing in your brain, okay, trying to put certain sentences together. And I'm going to ask you, well, why should I trust the words that are coming out of your mouth? If PSR is not true, then either your observations are suspect, because your observations don't necessarily had any reason behind it, okay?
Yeah.
Or the words that are coming out of your mouth have no reason behind them. Why would I trust the neural connections that were made in your brain if PSR is not true?
Yeah.
So
why would I follow the law to not kill somebody?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, the argument breaks down on its own. It's a self-defeating argument. To say that PSR is not true is a self-defeating argument. Yeah. Now, arguments like this, like they always kind of weird me out a little bit. I always feel like somebody is imposed like a sleight of hand on me when I hear these arguments. But no, the reality is we're simply beholding rationality itself when we say this. Okay, think about it. We simply assume that the universe is trustworthy enough that when we investigate it, we're able to get certain answers. Okay, so in other words, the universe is intelligible. The universe is intelligible. Okay, so anyway, how do we get from there? Okay, so let's say that we will grant that PSR is true. How does that get us to God, right? So when we consider everything, because of PSR, we know that everything can be explained. Now, the explanation can arrive from something that is outside of the thing, or it can be intrinsic to the thing, okay? So when we're talking about the basketball, well, what explains that the basketball is in that position at that moment in time? Well, something extrinsic to it, something brought it there. So the explanation as to why the basketball is in that position is from something outside of the basketball, right? Young Michael Jordan went over and dropped it there. Okay.
Yeah, right.
Well, why did Michael? What explains the reason as to why Michael Jordan went over there? Well, also something kind of extrinsic to him, and so on. Now, this will actually kind of lead us to the same kind of series, infinite regresses that we saw with the cosmological argument, and that we're going to make the same case. If it's simply a temporal thing, as to like in time, like why did the basketball get here at this moment in time, that's going to bring us back to the Big Bang and argument, oh, well, maybe the universe is infinite. Okay, that's fine. We're actually going to make a different art. That leads us into a linear series, which sure could be infinite. Okay. But we should actually consider a series that may not be infinite. And that would be a hierarchical series. So we have to look at the basketball in and of itself. So in other words, does the basketball exist?
Yeah.
What explains the existence of the basketball? Is it in itself, or does something else explain it? It has to be something else. So this is where Leibniz would talk about contingent things and necessary things.
Right.
A contingent thing is something that has the explanation for its existence outside of itself, and a necessary thing has an explanation for its existence in and of itself. If we look at the basketball, why do I say that the existence of the basketball is contingent on something else? Well, right, because if we look at it like from a physics standpoint, what constitutes the basketball? It's composed of different molecules, different atoms, okay? So then it's necessary for these atoms to hold together. But it's something intrinsic to the atoms that's holding them together. We could talk about the different forces. We could talk about nuclear force and electric force. These are things external to them. Moreover, if the thing is changeable, so for instance, could you make that basketball, maybe this is even better actually. Could we make that basketball non-existent? Could you destroy that basketball?
Yeah.
Yes. If you can destroy it, that means that its existence is contingent.
Right.
Its existence doesn't fully depend on itself. If it fully depended on itself, then you wouldn't be able to destroy it, or you wouldn't be able to bring it into being, right? Like the Earth. Did the Earth at some point come into being? Yeah, and I don't care where you are scientifically, like the world at some point came into being. Yeah. So it's a contingent thing, right? So the argument then is that at any given moment, if we stick with the basketball, something must be then upholding its existence at that moment in time. Mm-hmm. If the laws of physics suddenly break down, then the basketball couldn't exist, right? Yeah. Okay, well then something must be upholding the laws of physics themselves, okay? Mm-hmm. Well, you might say, well, why can't the laws of physics be the necessary being? Why can't they be the final resting point? Well, because then again, those laws of physics could be one thing or another. They don't really have the attributes that we're looking for something that is immutable, and something that is singular, and something that is eternal, okay? So ultimately then, in this hierarchical series, we're coming to something that is not contingent, but necessary, which means that its very existence is not coming from anywhere else. Mm-hmm. It's this necessary thing. Yeah. Its explanation, the explanation for its existence is within itself. Yeah,
and it not only exists, but it also can't, or it could not fail to exist. Right.
Right. Exactly. That's right. It could not fail to exist. Exactly right.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like, and I know we're about to get into kind of the necessary being, but let's get into it. Let's get into.
Yeah. So right. So now the question is this necessary being the God that we've been talking about? Like, why do we say that this necessary being is in fact God? Like, how are we even saying that it's God? So traditionally with these proofs then, we have to show that this being has the traditional attributes of God, like we saw with the cosmological argument. And it's actually quite simple. This necessary being would have to be pure actuality. This necessary being would have to be pure actuality, because if it had potentiality, then there would have to be something outside of it that would actualize that potential. Yeah. So therefore something else would need to explain it. Right. But the very fact that it explains itself means that there's no potentiality within it that would need to be actualized and therefore explained by something else. So it pretty much puts us then in the same chain of attributes. This entity then is purely actual. Yeah. And if it's If it's purely actual, then it can't, for instance, exist in time, because if it existed in time, then it could exist in this time or that time, in different times. So it would have a potentiality that would need to be actualized.
Yeah.
So therefore, it's eternal, right? We could talk about if it's purely actual, then that means it is omnipotent, because it has the power to actualize everything ahead of it, and so forth. So again, we're going to find all of the attributes of God, just like we did with the cosmological argument.
Yeah.
So
and I feel like when we're getting into now this this necessary being, or God, people will then say, okay, well, with the PSR. Okay, well then what about God? What's, where's the explanation for God? But that's where right away, I mean, I feel like that one's kind of easy to debunk, or I guess respond to, because this is specifically saying, I can never say his name. Leibniz is specifically saying that contingent things need an explanation.
That's
He's not saying that the
necessary
being needs an explanation, but that the contingent things have an explanation.
Well,
right?
I would correct that a little bit. Like actually, the argument in the PSR is that everything needs an explanation, but that the necessary being is self-explanatory.
Okay,
so the necessary being explains itself, and it explains every contingent thing.
Yeah.
Unlike with the cosmological argument, then there is like a little trickiness there. We would actually say that it's not the case in the cosmological argument that everything needs a cause.
Yeah.
It's only things that have potentiality that need a cause, meaning that it's only things that have a potentiality that become actualized by something external to them, which is what we call causation.
Yeah.
So, in fact, Sal, I think we can now jump into the main objections to these arguments, and so
kind of jumped the gun there. Right?
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good, because probably the most typical objection that is given to the cosmological argument, for instance, and a lot of people kind of put this very glibly, is okay. Well, if everything if there's a cause to everything, just like we just said, if there's a cause to everything, then what caused God? It's like, whoa, oh man, okay. And no, the cosmological argument never says that everything requires a cause. No. So it's simply a straw man argument to go there. Only things with potentiality require a cause. So it's really, you have to understand Aristotle's argument correctly about potentialities and actualities. So every object, and as we observe, like pretty much every object in our experience, it's subject to change. It's mutable. Is why we say that things are mutable. Okay? And so we need something external to it that is actual, that will actualize the potentiality of the given object. But there is a possibility that you would have something that doesn't have potentiality, but that is pure actuality. And that is just one entity. So there's, in fact, one entity that does not require a cause, because it's what? It's pure actuality. So that simply misses the point of the argument. Yeah. So,
I think another one, and like the interpretations of like quantum mechanics.
Oh yeah.
And kind of like the whole thing of you have you have like a something that's going to happen, and there's different ways for something to happen, right?
Sure.
So there's like the A, B, and C. There's like the percentages of A happening, percentage of B happening, and C happening, and then C happens.
Right.
Well, does it matter that A and B didn't happen, or like what, or
Yeah, no, that's a very good objection, Sal. So when we do look at quantum mechanics, then quantum mechanics operates under the assumption that certain things are probabilistic, and therefore that causation breaks down. Okay. That's a very powerful objection. There are a couple of answers to it. Phaser has an answer that I don't necessarily know. I think maybe the reality is a little bit different. But let me present Phaser's argument, which is actually a perfectly good argument.
Uh-huh.
So simply to say that a certain event is going to depend on some probability doesn't take away the fact that it's going to be within the link of causation, actually. Because, okay, fine. The structure or the way an atom is going to operate is that, according to quantum physics, is that, well, there's a probability that this atom is going to be here right now, but actually there's a probability that it would be over here, or there's a probability that it would be over here. So when the probability function of an atom collapses, and that's when it interacts with something or if it's observed, it gets complicated. But the point is, then there's complete chance there. There's no causation. But no, here's the point. When we look at the nature of the atom itself, okay, what's upholding its existence? Something is upholding its existence that gives that atom a particular nature.
Yeah.
And the particular nature of the atom is that it's going to obey these particular laws of probability. Mm-hmm. Okay? Mm-hmm. So that actually, all that does, the fact that there's a probability element there according to Phaser, simply means that that's kind of like an explanation of a link in the chain, okay? But you still have this link in the chain. It just means that this link in the chain follows certain rules. It follows rules of probability as opposed to following rules of that are non-probabilistic. So the fact that there can be indeterminism given quantum mechanics does not disprove the fact that there's still going to be causation in the universe. So now my point of view is actually a little bit different. I actually agree with Einstein that I don't believe that the ultimate way that atoms behave is probabilistic. I think that the fact that quantum mechanics works with probability is simply an abstraction that kind of works well. Like it seems that it's probabilistic, but it may well be that there are actually deeper reasons behind it, and that when we explore it, it seems like it's simply probability at play. Okay, but it may well be that there's a deeper reality behind it that is in fact not probability at all. That it only seems that it's probability. Okay. So like when we look at this particular atom, if suddenly it showed up over here, the quantum physicist is like, oh, okay, yeah, so the probability was X, so therefore that's what it was.
So does that mean that there's no there's no reason why this happened and the other two didn't, or this happened something else didn't happen?
Well, sure. I mean, that there's no reason. That the only reason is that it was just chance, and that's that. So the quantum physicist is saying, well, it was just probability, and that's that. And I doubt that that's the true reality of the case. I believe, like Einstein did, that there's probably a deeper reality there. Like if the atom showed up here, there are actually some underlying reasons as to why that was. Okay. That it wasn't ultimately.
Oh, right. Okay. So you're saying that there is a reason.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
A happened and
I suspect.
B and C didn't happen.
I suspect, but I don't know that to be the case.
Right.
The point that Phaser is making.
But it still doesn't. That it doesn't, regardless of all that, it doesn't change.
That's right, because Phaser's argument is that, fine, if that's going to be the nature of the thing, then that's the nature of the thing. But where did the nature of the thing come from? So something had to give it that nature. Exactly. So as opposed to something else.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Okay, so another argument that is very typical, you hear this from Neil deGrasse Tyson and other people, is that theists have this God of the gaps, right? So I don't know. Have you heard of this, Sal? Like God of the gaps? Yeah. So, I think if I understand the argument correctly, they're saying that we're making up this God that is simply explaining the way the universe works as a placeholder for our ignorance. Okay. And this kind of goes hand in hand with what we were saying before about scientism. Okay, so they're making the assumption that science is going to be able to make sense of everything. Okay, so just hold on tight, and maybe in the future, maybe science will show us if there's definitely a God or not, or it'll be able to explain all of the universe, obviously. So I don't know why we have so much faith necessarily in this process that it's going to be able to explain everything, and why we have faith that it's only material realities that are true. So again,
and this is what a lot of like the top, big minds think,
Right.
and like I remember we were listening kind of to what Lennox was talking about when he was talking about Stephen Hawking.
Oh yeah.
And that Hawking very much thinks that or kind of uses that God of the gaps. It's like you can, of course, it's just something you're making up because you don't know.
That's right.
You're ignorant, right.
Yeah, no, but if you think about it, the arguments,
not making it,
and the arguments that we presented here had nothing to do with science per se, and that's the point. Like when we talk about how, when we talk about the basketball, that its existence needs to be upheld. Look, we talked about that molecules and the atoms, but the reality is we could have gone with some kind of a different paradigm. In other words, we're saying that the particular steps as to how the being of the basketball is upheld, whatever that chain may look like, that is the place of science. It's the place of science to give us like exactly the correct way that this works. Let me give an example. Like one example that Phaser actually uses to explain the cosmological argument, as he talks about how a cup of coffee actually is becoming cold, right? So he says, well, the cup of coffee becomes cold, and so it's changing from hot to cold. So there it has the potentiality to become cold.
Yeah.
And he says, oh, well, how is it that potentiality becomes actual? And he says, well, it's because there's the cold air. And so the cold air is actualizing that potential of the cup of coffee.
Right, yeah.
Now, actually, that's a little bit like I could see a lot of people objecting right away and saying there's no such thing as coldness. Okay?
Yeah.
Obviously, you're so dumb. You don't know about science. You don't realize that coldness is not a thing.
Right.
Okay? Okay. Fine. That's right. You're right. The particular links of chain that we just gave there are actually not quite the right links. Okay.
Yeah.
The point is there are links. Here's what we should say. Oh, if a cup of coffee is becoming cold, it's actually, we know that the temperature of something is the average kinetic energy of its molecules. Mm-hmm. So if the cup of coffee is going to become cold, it's because those molecules are actually going to slow down. Okay, so what's going to slow down those molecules? Well, those molecules are going to collide with the molecules of the cup, which don't have as high of a kinetic energy. And so with those collisions, some of the molecules of the cup of coffee will actually take some of that kinetic energy, and therefore the kinetic energy of the water molecules of the coffee will actually become less. And so that's how it gets colder.
Yeah.
It was still the cup itself that was actualizing that potential. Yeah. Okay. So the point that we're trying to make here is that sure, science can give us a better description about how this chain is going to work out. The point is that the argument that we're making is a metaphysical one.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
We're making a metaphysical claim that that the causation, or what causes the existence of this water, has to come from somewhere, and that this series is a finite series. It's a hierarchical finite series that has to find a place with a unactualized actualizer. Yeah. However that may be, whatever process that may be like. The argument that we're making here is not one of science. It's one of metaphysics and logic.
Yeah.
Okay? So we're not this is not God of the gaps. This is not God of the gaps at all.
Yeah.
Right. I think some people actually make the fallacy of trying to explain God in a more scientific way, or trying to retrace the step in our time in history or something like that No. The point is, the arguments that we're making here are outside of time, outside of the particular way that nature works. but it's a more fundamental claim.
Right. Yeah. Definitely.
So that's what I would say about that. And kind of connected to the God of the gaps critique, a very common thing that we would hear atheists say is, hey, Christian or Jew or Muslim. And I say Christian, Jew, or Muslim because what's special about them? That these are the monotheistic faiths, right? These arguments are simply stipulating that we can actually prove rationally that there is a one God. Okay. Yeah. Now, is that the God of the Bible? Is that the God of Christians? Is that the God of Jews? Or is that the God of Muslims? Well, that's another discussion. Okay.
Yeah. Right.
But what a lot of atheists will say, well, okay, you Christian or you Jew or you Muslim, you don't believe in Zeus. You don't believe in Venus or Thor or all these other gods. I'm just taking it a step further, and I'm saying that I also don't believe in the God of monotheism.
Yeah.
And it's like it's a cute. That's very cute, right?
Yeah.
And if you don't delve into this, it can seem kind of it can take you off guard. Okay. Yeah. But the point here is that the God that we're talking about is that it's a God that's outside of nature. We're talking about a God that creates nature as we know it.
Yeah, okay? and that kind of leads into what when we've mentioned Ravi Zacharias, yep. and he talks about when he talks about God, and understanding who God is, and this is directly compared to other entities like Zeus and other, lower G gods. Yep. And God, the God that we're talking about in the monotheistic sense, is that, he's the only God whose reason for existence is explained in himself.
That's right.
You get Zeus and you get all these other lower G gods that
those were
are
God
explained.
Of the gaps.
Yeah.
Yeah, Zeus.
They are.
That's
yeah.
Right.
Their reasoning, their reason for existence is found from outside things.
Exactly.
So.
Yes. No. The what's it called? The pantheon. The pantheon, like all the Greek gods. Those were God of the gaps. The God of thunder. Oh, there's thunder. Oh, okay. Maybe there's a God. Yeah. Or, oh, wow, we had such a good crop this year. Oh, okay, it's the God of agriculture and stuff like that. That's exactly what God of the gaps would be. That's trying to find a God in nature itself. Okay?
Yeah.
And no. These metaphysical proofs that we're talking about, what conclusion did we reach? What conclusion did Aristotle reach? That there are multiple gods? No. That there is a single one. That if we do this logical examination, we're going to find that the source of all things has to be a single source.
Yeah.
So, whatever name you want to give to this one God, okay, call him God, Father, call him Allah, okay, whatever. That's another discussion that we would have. The point is, we're making a logical argument here that there must be one entity that is the source of all things, an unactualized actualizer.
Whose reason of existence comes from itself, because it's unnatural.
And that we can get these attributes from this God in a reasonable fashion, that this God is eternal, that this God is perfect, that this God is immutable. Okay?
Yeah. So, going back to the question that we asked, does God exist? I think the two things that we've talked about, we didn't really get to the Neoplatonic, but that's fine. I think we've hit a lot of good points, right? I think all of everything that we've talked about, kind of, it's very evident that it leads. There's that chain, and I loved what you said. I loved how you said that we're making the point that there is a chain, right?
Right.
And so if we go back, Jim, if you kind of give us an overlap again of the two things we talked.
So again, the cool thing about what we did today was really just a narrow focus on how we can in fact use a little bit of logic to make a very good argument for the existence of God. Now, look, I'm not gonna stand here and say that I can say that this is this is true 100%. That is to say, I can't say that there isn't possibly some kind of error in this logic. It may well be. The point is, if you object to these proofs from Aristotle and from Leibniz and the others, you have to come up with good arguments against them. I am not convinced. I have not seen an argument that dissuades me from this, right? I'm not going to say that we have it perfectly figured out, that there wouldn't perhaps be a better way to put it, a more logical way to bring up the proof of the existence of God, okay? But it is, in fact, very compelling. Now, the reason I put it this way is these reasons weren't actually the ones that ultimately convinced me that God exists. There may be others. For me, probably the most important way that I was convinced about the existence of God is by reading the Bible, okay? I always came at it this way, that I simply want the best explanation about how the world works, okay? The scientistic explanation that science explains everything ultimately did not do it for me, because I observed things in the world. I observed things in our everyday lives that are not explained by science, okay? Whether a person is just or unjust, I do not see an explanation for science there. Whether something is beautiful or not beautiful, I do not see an explanation for it there. The fact that I as a human being, even when I know that something is right and I don't do what is right, the fact that there's this like badness in me, that I do the wrong thing, the fact that I see evil and suffering in the world, the fact that I see 2 world wars, actually the best explanation for the way that the world works, I actually find in the Bible. All of the beauty and all of the way that we fall short, and the way the desires of our heart, everything that I see the world working, I see a perfect explanation of it in the Bible, and that's why I believe it. Yeah. So this is not by any means these proofs that these rational proofs that we've seen are not by any stretch like the final word on this, or necessarily the best way to convince somebody that God exists. But I really enjoyed kind of having that narrow focus and seeing how we can look at it metaphysically and what are some of the best arguments. Yeah.
Now, and I also think that talking about this, yes, it's obviously we're talking about this because it's important to really understand or try to come to the truth, finding the truth of, is there a God? Does God exist? But I think all these different rationales can be used in everyday life, right? And I think that's something we want to encourage everybody to stop and think about, about life, about your life, the things that you're doing, the things that exist, and just being better thinkers, having better rationale, right? Those are all things that can be applied to our lives, and hence then that leads to talking about these big questions like, does God exist, right? And I think and I think it's really funny because we could talk about so many other things, especially like human nature and freedom and all the different things we've talked about, and it really does. It can all lead you back to, does God exist? Right? And I think that's really cool. And we encourage everybody to really dig deep and take a look at what some of these great thinkers say about the existence of God. Challenge yourself as well with people that read up on some of these atheists. What do they say, right? Sure. And both sides, and really try to break it down like we are doing. We're just thankful to have a platform, and the opportunity to have fun, but then also talk about these things. We want to hear what you have to say, some questions of what we've talked about, again, email us or comment, post on our Facebook page. We encourage that definitely. And again, I'm going to keep saying every time we are working on some good stuff for the future as far as our YouTube channel and just getting back to videos. Right now we're having fun smoking cigars and having some drinks and talking about the existence of God, right?
Yep, sweet.
So again, thanks for joining us, guys. Make sure to follow us on everything. And remember, truth is too precious to give up on.
That's right. Absolutely. Thanks so much, guys. We'll see you next time.
See ya.